But flat fell seams, I've got a bit of calico here that I'm going to demonstrate on. For a proper flat fell seam, Amy's going to do her fancy camera work now. So when you're working with want to do a flat fell seam, you first of all start with your fabric wrong sides together. So a little bit like when you're doing a French seam, you start off wrong sides together and pin your edges together. And as always, I'm pinning using my pins like a basting, going parallel to the edge of the fabric. I know we have this discussion quite a lot in the sewing room about which ways to pin, and it is personal choice. I like to pin this way because I like my pins to be along my stitching line. If you're right-handed, if you have your raw edges away from you when you're pinning, the pins will always be in the right direction to take out when you're sewing. If you're left-handed, have your raw edges towards you. So just a little tip there. So I'm going to stitch this seam with a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Hold on, just got to get the foot of my machine disappeared on the table. We're always so organised. Notice we have the white fabric on the table today, so we're almost organised. So
I can't really. Okay.
I'm going to stitch this seam. I'm just doing the normal standard seam allowance, but you do want at least a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance when you're doing flat fell seams. So if your pattern has less, you might want to increase the seam allowance to make it a bit easier. I remember we had, I think it was Jane, making a style art pattern for a denim jacket, and it had very small seam allowances, and it was calling for flat fell seams, and it makes it very tricky. So I've stitched my seam. There we go. I did have my little scissors out here, obviously. So I stitched my seam 1.5 centimetres from the edge there, and then I'm going to just finger press this because it's calico, but you would then go to the iron and press the seams in one direction, like this. We're going to trim off the underneath one. The underneath one, we're going to trim it off to about half. So I'm going to concentrate on this and not look at the screen. So you've trimmed off the underneath seam, everything's pressed that way. You then turn under the top seam so it's encasing that raw edge there, and pin through all layers. It's always tricky when I've got a fabric on the table. I'm just going to put my ruler underneath. There we go, now I can pin properly. So it's better to have a hard surface underneath when you're pinning, so you don't end up pinning the tablecloth. So I'm just wrapping that top raw edge over the underneath one. And you could press this, you could do this at the ironing board and press it. Obviously I've got calico here, so I'm just finger pressing it. And then I'm going to top stitch down the other edge. I'd really like a ditch foot, but I don't think I've got one. I wasn't that prepared. Oh, I have. Well done. I am prepared. So when you're top stitching like this, you know it can be quite tricky to do a straight line. And I always say in class that the best way to get a straight line is to not look at the needle. So anything that you've got that can help you with that is really useful. So I like to use a ditch foot. In Genome's this is an S, and it's got a guide in the middle here. And that guide is right behind the needle. So when I'm using this for doing top stitching, I'll just move the needle over slightly. So the guide is running along the edge of the seam here, and I've moved the needle over slightly so that I can get a nice straight seam. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to move the needle over slightly so that I can stitch on the edge of the fabric. So I've moved my needle over to the left to position 1. So now I can just stitch straight down. Yeah. You're doing fancy camera work?
Well, I was, and then I tripped over the tripod.
Oh. So there we go. I could actually move it over to 0.5 actually, but I'll leave it there for now. So now I'm just running the guide down along the edge of the seam. I think it's catching it. I might have missed a bit because I just stopped and looked. So I might only look at half of this seam. I'm doing things at a funny angle.
Tell me about it.
You can't see the pile of stuff that's fallen down behind the counter.
No.
So yeah, we're only going to look at half this seam. We're only going to look at this bit because I got distracted for a minute and I lost it. There we go. So there we go. So I have just stitched along both that seam there. So that's encased all those raw edges, and it's a really nice strong seam. So I hope that's helped with the flat fell seams. I probably could have moved that needle over a little bit more actually, and that would have caught that a bit easier. But you know, it's live, so spend a bit more time on your setup, and also pressing it beforehand makes a lot better. So I hope that's helped. The other seam that you can do as a quick alternative is a fake flat fell seam, where you just stitch your fabrics right sides together, press to one side, and then top stitch. So it looks like a flat fell seam, but it's overlocked on the inside. So I hope that's helped a little bit with flat fell seams if you're doing things, making jeans and things like that.